Hey, welcome back to the podcast. This is my friend Josh Denhart, who's been on here before, and we get to talk all the time about ministry and life and strategy and I don't know, behind the scenes at conferences and like what's that, what the conversations we have there sometimes can make it here, which is a lot of fun. Josh, welcome back. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good, buddy. Very grateful. I love doing stuff like this. This is fun. I like talking with you.
Same. I like talking with you. So, it's the trade thing. Like we do the same
It
kind
is.
of thing. You got to tell us, just in case anybody doesn't know who you are, you need to tell us about lead ministry
Yeah.
as well as KidMin Science and all that. But we're kind of in the same field. We both worked in churches. We both help church leaders with volunteers and other things. And so
Yeah.
it's always great to talk shop.
It is. And so my name is Josh Denhart. I live in West Des Moines, Iowa. I was in a vocational pastoral role for a long time. Now I have transitioned. I created a thing called leadministry.com. Essentially, it's a bunch of training courses and one-on-one coaching. So the way that I put it, Nick, is I seek to create ridiculously practical resources to make ministry easier. Emphasis on the easier. I always found that it was an uphill battle, and I guess, in a sense, part of my life calling is to make it not so hard, right? And
Yeah.
I found that it was really hard. And so I thought, wow, well, what if my hardship ended up becoming somebody else's easier road? So that's kind of what I do. And then the other piece that I do is called The Amazing Chemistry Show, KidMin Science. I have a couple of VBS programs around science, but then also a big, huge 32-foot stage production, fire, explosions, foam, liquid nitrogen. Very fun, very cool. So that's kind of the evangelistic side and the outreach side. And then the leadministry.com is more of, the training and leadership side. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and because I got to see you at a conference just recently, you showed me some of the behind the scenes of like what the Amazing Chemistry Show involves. Because there's like even like I don't know how to describe it, but kids get to do things before the show. So it's interactive. It's like it's not just a show. It's
That's
like
correct.
this whole interactive mobile experience that you show up to the church with.
Yeah, it's like a traveling science center, right? The church
There you go.
provides 26 8-foot tables. I provide all the science stuff, all the table coverings, all these big, huge, tall banners, and families walk in and are like, what is this? And then they move through at their own pace for 2 hours, playing with some fun science, launching rockets, building a catapult that they take home, all 170 different things that they can do. And then
It's
after
crazy.
that, they're all kind of juiced up on science, and then I do the big stage show.
That's so good. And I mean, you had most kids at fire and explosions and you know what I mean? Like, like we're signed up, we're in. Well, today we're going to talk more. You mentioned coaching, the one-on-one coaching, is one of the things you mentioned earlier there. And I thought a great thing, I asked you this kind of off air, we were talking previously. I said, I want to ask you on a podcast recording, what are the common topics that come up when you're coaching leaders, mostly in the kids ministry space, probably. Like, what are the things that these topics rise to the top? Most people are dealing with these, their challenges, whatever they are, and then how do you coach them on it? So that's my big question. Like, what are those topics, and then maybe we can dive into each of them and kind of have almost like a coaching time with Josh right here.
Yeah. Well, I would say there's kind of 4 big buckets that I think about. Now, okay, this is a really important piece. Every single coaching call that I have, and I have 2 later today, they start with this question. Okay, here it is. What would be the biggest win or victory for you at the end of today's coaching call? What would be the biggest win or victory at the end of the call today? So in other words, I want to find out what is current and pressing in their life, and I want to help them deal with that. Now, stick with me. I have 2 main goals, right? The first goal is I have a series of things that I want them to move through, that I'm going to take them through. I would call that the roadmap. So for instance, this isn't just coaching. They have access to 13 full-length digital courses. And the coaching, like I'm asking them, hey, by this call, when we get on a call today, I hope that you've gone through these pieces of the course, because I don't want to try to repeat myself, because I couldn't have said it any better, Nick, than I did on the video. And so I want them to move through that, which then they're learning independent of me. and then we'll kind of like jump into some of those topics and take them a little bit deeper. So I have a roadmap. In other words, if you can do some right things as it relates to retaining volunteers, I'm just pulling something out of the air. If you can figure out how to retain volunteers, you're going to be in a less bad position down the road. So what I don't want to do is to get on a call with people and deal with their immediate emergencies nonstop, because that's a very reactionary way to lead, and it's a reactionary way to coach. What I want to do is take them through a series of things that would make for less opportunity for cleanup on aisle 9. I think about it as a grocery store, right? And if you stack the cans in a particular way, they're going to be less likely to fall all over the place. And I see people who I'm like, whoa. Do you realize that you're getting ready to have cleanup on aisle 9 simply because you're not thinking through some strategy? And they're like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's going to topple over really quick. So on one hand, I want to take them through some systematic, like clean things up, be a better leader in general. I call that the roadmap. In other words, I'm taking them someplace. However, let's say that on a particular day, Nick, that I want to talk about, as I said earlier, maybe it's retaining volunteers, but they are dealing with a conflict with a psychotic volunteer, okay? And so their urgent need is going to trump my particular roadmap milestone. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. So do you find that, like, I mean, this is on average, calls are half spent on the roadmap and what you want to talk about, half on the urgent? Like, how much is, it's the important versus urgent thing, right? How much time do you get to spend on each one?
Now, this is very interesting. You brought up a very interesting point here. And again, this is just kind of how God works, right? It kind of works out that the thing that I kind of want to talk about today, it typically dovetails with what they're going through. Now, not always, but that often happens. But I will say this, that I'll say this. Regardless, unless it's like absolute, like DEFCON 5 emergency kind of deal, we will hit both. And I kind of time it, because what I tell them is, hey, listen, I know that we're dealing with an angry volunteer. That's something that I had planned to talk about in 7 weeks. Okay.
We're
going to talk about it today, but we're also going to talk about some things that would ultimately prevent your volunteers from getting angry with you. Because if you can, here's like something that I pass on to all people. If you have a problem sitting in the middle of the road, my job is to help you build a ramp before that problem so that you can jump and never experience that road bump or that that pitfall. And so, so a lot of what I do is helping them with systems and organization. You know me. Sorry, I'm kind of a systems guy. I'm a very administratively dialed in kind of guy. And I have found that from a coaching standpoint, kind of whatever my biggest and best spiritual gift is, that ends up translating to the people that I work with. So systems and organization is a big one.
Well, and that is a big part of kids ministry, so we can definitely sit there for a little bit. Now, I feel like these are stereotypes, right? But like, I'll joke sometimes that student ministry has no systems or organization, but they do have the evangelism, discipleship, the wow factor, the fun. And a lot of times on the kids side, almost by necessity, you have to have more systems and organization. The way I say it is, like, if you're student ministry, you could lead a room of 40, 50 students with you and 2 volunteers if you had to do it. It's not great.
Exactly
It's
right.
not the way you should do ministry. You can't do that in kids, because, those 3 babies got to be over here, and then those 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds got to be over here. Like, you can't. I always say children's ministry leaders, you're forced to lead things you can't see, which then requires, more systems and all that. So when that topic comes up, how does it come up? Is it kind of like, man, the whole thing's a mess? Or is it like, this is one area we need help? Do they know it's a mess? Or are you the one that helps them know it's a mess? Like, I'm just curious. What does that look like?
Yeah, so here's a great example. I love this one. So a gal gets on the call with me, and I say, hey, at the end of today, what would be a great win for you? She goes, well, if you can somehow figure out, and she said this kind of tongue in cheek. She said, our church has a lot of outside guests that use our space and use our rooms for free and some for a very nominal amount. I said, okay. And she goes, is there a way that you could get no groups to use our church? And then, of course, she laughed and she goes, I really don't mean that. But I said, just curious, where were you kind of going, even though it was tongue in cheek? She goes, well, what I'm frustrated about is that they keep leaving huge messes after they're gone. And then I walk in and I have to spend my time cleaning up after them. And I said, well, would you want to never do that again? And she said, of course. So then we spent some serious time, and I said, well, what would it look like? And I'll try to go fast through this, Nick. But this was a system now. And I said, what if you were to take photographs of the completed room, and then you had a checklist of things that you needed them to do? That now gets laminated. It's in the office. And in order to get the key, I said, do they lock the room? She said they locked the room. I said, so they can't just walk in there? No. Okay, great. And then they lock the room when they're done? Yes. Great. So in order to get the key, you have to get this sheet. And then in order to turn the key back in, you have to show with like dry erase markers that you've checked these things off. And the final check mark is, does this room look like this picture? Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
and
great.
So then I said, and she was like just scurrying and writing down super fast. And she's like, why didn't I think of this? Well, that comes to another piece, which is an outside perspective that just like, I see that which you don't see. And so then by the next call that we had, guys, I could cry about this. And I got goosebumps right now, truly, because this is my life's work, right? She showed up to the next call with 7 rooms on one, different, each had their sheet of paper, and she came in like a kindergartner with their homework done.
Yeah. All excited about it.
Yeah.
Here's the question I'd have to ask though, because we've all lived this life. My elementary director was complaining about sharing space an hour ago on a Zoom call, and she does feel it more than anybody else. I want to see what happens like if that still doesn't work. That's when because sometimes like that should work. But a lot of times people skirt that accountability. I had this is totally unrelated. I mean, it's related, but it's loose, especially for churches that have like a daycare or a preschool in their facility where it's shared every week. And actually they're using it more than you are because they're in it 5 days a week. You're in it one day. And one of Frank Beeler, a friend who's been on the podcast before, he said one of the things they did with this facility, he said it was the best thing we ever decided because during the week it's a school or a preschool and, on the weekend it's church. He said, we pay somebody part-time. They come in 2 hours at the end of the school week to make sure it's ready for Sunday. They're like the check. They don't do all the things. They're more like the check, the spot check.
I love it.
And then he's like, and then they come in Sunday night before the school week starts to make sure it's ready for the school. And it's like, it's an extra layer of accountability that's not this staff person that's working in kids. That's great because it's at second level if it still fails,
It's a safety valve. But the thing is that that's probably the amount that they're paying that person is chump change in comparison to the internal friction that's going to be caused from the school and the church. And so that's huge. So ultimately, the way that we foolproofed this is that you're signing the bottom of that paper. Yeah. And you're putting your phone number. And if we walk in, because the door's locked, ain't nobody been in there but you, buddy. So if we walk in and it doesn't look like that, you're getting a phone call. And that's written on that sheet. And so all of a sudden they're like, oh, dude, maybe we better. I don't want to be, you don't want to be the person that we call and say, get yourself right back up in here and finish cleaning this.
Well, and that's the accountability part that's missing. And that's why she's doing it all the time because there's unclear expectations and no accountability. Now you've given her clear expectations or she's made them. And there's accountability with having to sign that thing and turn the key back in. That's great.
And by the way, it looks glorious because their front office person happens to be ultra gifted at Canva. Yeah. And so I was like, wow, this looks this isn't like homespun. This looks really good. And so she got on the call with me and she goes, the entire problem is solved. So stick with me. What do I do in coaching? I look at pain points and then I just ask the question, honestly, would you like this to never be there again? And then Nick, I think about this as a large. Have you ever driven your car in the state of Michigan? Maybe around Detroit?
No, you know what? I've never been to Michigan. Have I? Not? No, I
Well,
don't think I
your
have.
your car's suspension probably doesn't have any problems, because if you drive through Michigan, you've got suspension problems now because the potholes are. This the worst
That could be true
place,
of Dallas too. That actually could be true of where I live as well. But
dude. The
maybe
worst. So watch this. This poor lady had a huge pothole about the size of a car that was jacking things up. And I said, okay, let's either fill that in or let's build a ramp. And so then
Yeah.
she never had to experience that again. And so then that was taken off of her plate in terms of a pain point. That was done
Yeah.
through an outside voice helping her to create a system. So that's one
Yeah.
thing that I do.
What's another system, especially kids ministry? I mean, a lot of kids ministry people relate to the one you just shared. That is a common one, but maybe even more core to children's ministry that you find that a lot of churches aren't doing well. Like this, you help a lot with coaching. This one's a common, whether it's check-in or whatever it might be, or recruitment or attainment or whatever system.
Okay.
You're like, you talk to people and you're like, oh yeah, this could use some help. And I've had to help a lot of leaders with this. Here's what you do.
Okay. Now this one here, okay, what I'm getting ready to share is something that I've solved for multiple people, but it isn't as easy, and it's not a quick fix. There's a lot that goes behind this, okay? And you'll understand after I explain this. So the idea is, or let's go back to the pain point. Somebody gets a hold of me and they're like, I literally am ready to lose my mind. And I'm like, okay, that sounds normal. Tell me what your mind is being lost on.
Yeah, that's a common children's pastor. Yeah, yeah. It's
So
a day that ends in Y. What's going on?
Yeah. And so I say, hey, you're experiencing a good case of the normals. This is fine.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
specifically is eating your lunch? And she said, and this is multiple people. They said, Thursday at 5 p.m., we have got the schedule filled.
I know where this is going.
Oh, of course you do.
Every kid's pastor knows where this is going.
So from 5 p.m. on Thursday until, well, let's even go midnight on Saturday, maybe even by 7 a.m. on Sunday, a ton of people have just dropped off the map. And so now all the work that you did to fill that schedule has now big holes. Okay, that's the pain point. And now she said, my weekend is now filled with scurrying to fill these slots, and yet then another one drops off, and I'm literally going crazy. I just don't think I can do this anymore. And I said, okay, this sounds dorky, but it's a psychological thing. I asked, would you want that problem completely eliminated in your life? And she says, yes. Okay, now we have entrance, right? And so now this sounds simple, but you got to give me a little room on this. I call it switching, creating a culture of switching, not ditching. And so I said, what's happening is as soon as somebody has to cancel, and let's say it's for good reasons, a kid's barfing, right? A family member dies and they were dumb and they were going to be on vacation and they just didn't even think. Okay, so these are all things that happen all the time. I said, you have positioned yourself as the first and only call that they can make. They either text you or they call you or they email you. She said, yes. And I said, so they're only following the protocol that they know, which is you're the problem solver with this. And I said, can I ask you a question? Of course, she said yes. And I said, how relationally rich is, let's take your nursery, for instance. How relationally rich is the 11 a.m. nursery squad that you have? She goes, what do you mean? I said, how well do they know each other? She goes, pretty well. I said, would you say that they know each other well enough that they would not want to fail each other? She's like, maybe. I said, okay. So what we need to do, the start of this is, this is a bigger picture here. She did it, and the problem is solved. I said, you need to have quarterly gatherings of every one of your nursery people. She goes, why? And I said, because these people need to be friends with one another. They need to know each other's names. We need to have some kind of a social thing. She's like, okay, well, to what end? And I said, because there is a common thing. Now remember, we as a species, a human being created in the image of God, we are more like wolves and a pack of wolves that help each other and they go to get food by ganging up on a predator or on some food rather than a bear who rolls solo. We are a communal type organism. Okay, let's go with that. I said, so when this person has to be gone, they now have a list. By the way, I don't introduce this. We get to know each other. We get to be friends. We get to, okay. After that, I say, hey gang, here's a new strategy. If you have to be gone, I want you to look to this list first, and you can text this whole group. You can email this whole group. I've even set up a channel for that or whatever. And you need to say, hey, I'm gone here. Does anybody able to switch with me? And then all of a sudden they do all of this internal switching. And I never know the difference. Yeah. I only know when the person says, hey, Connie's going to cover for me. I'm covering for Connie. You may want to make that switch. That's easy for me. I don't even have to touch that. I deal with that on Monday morning as I'm drinking my coffee. But the thing is that I've watched people try this and it fails. And the reason that it fails is the people on their list, they don't know each other. They don't care about each other. They're just, they just see a bunch of words and letters that would stand for somebody's name and like who that person is. They don't know this person. But when all of a sudden they know them and like them, and they're like, hey, I got this really big thing that came up. My kid is barfing. They're like, I empathize with that. So they say, I got you. I'll do this week. You do next week. Very good. Now watch this. This is called the law of reciprocity. When this person covers for this person, there's now this social exchange that took place that this other person is like, hey, they did me a solid down the road. They need anything. I'm in. That's the law of reciprocity because we're pack animals. Hey, you help me start fire? Fantastic. I'll give you some of my meat. That's the way this works. Now, the fail is when people really don't know each other.
Yeah. I could see that because, it's funny. I haven't thought about it this way, but like all my kids went to a preschool co-op where it was like 2 hours, 3 days a week, or at one point it was every day for 2.5 hours once they get older. And you had to have 2 parent volunteers every day. And this totally happened because and here's the way it would work, especially when my kids were first in it, like when they were 3, we wouldn't know everybody. Now, eventually, 2 years in, you'd get to know a lot of the parents because you're saying kids stayed in. But year 1, fall, you don't know anybody, and it is like a lot of people are not as quick to jump on the hey, I need help, can you switch with me thing. And it still worked, but it was very like need based. Like, Josh, you asked to switch, and you know what, I've got a day I can't do, so the reciprocity thing came into play because I was like, hey, yes, I'll switch with you, but can you do this one? But then by the time you got to spring that year, people knew each other better and they were way more likely to respond. And then by the time you got to year 2, I mean, it was like not even a problem. You could always get help. And here's the funny thing. This schedule was put together by the staff with no input from us. So you could, like, in our world, we're scheduling people knowing that they've already agreed to serve at these days and these times. We were put on the schedule with nobody asked us before they made the schedule, Josh. It was just, here's the schedule. Good luck. So we had to ask to switch more than you'd think,
Well, and the funny thing is that when, like, you weren't recruited, you were told. And it's like, hey, your kid goes to school here. Your kid goes to school here. Your obligation is, am I right?
Yes, it was. It was in the handbook, totally. And like you paid, I don't know what it was. It's $20, $50. It was a good price. It was one of those. And then it's like, it was in the same handbook where like if you're $1 for every minute late, like, they had it dialed in from an administrative standpoint.
Well, so then at the end of the day, another system, which is what I call creating a system of switching, not ditching. Everybody wants this system in place, but really the hard work comes down to making sure that the 7 people in that room and the 12 people in this room, they really, really, really have the back of the other people. That's where I come in because I create the conditions by which they become friends. That's the missing link. I've had people who, somebody said, hey, I'm like, they're on some closed social media Facebook group and they throw out, I'm really suffering and struggling. And I said, here's an article, create a system of switching, not ditching. And then they're like, yeah, that doesn't work. And I said, do your people know and love and care for each other? No, not really. There's your problem.
Well, and that happens. You probably face that a lot with coaching. I just literally had somebody tell me this today on staff at his church. He's at a large church. He's the executive pastor. And he was talking about how they've tried volunteer recruiting strategies that have worked for him when done right, but then his team will do them halfway and they don't work. And he's like, well, yeah, you did it halfway. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's not that the plan doesn't work. You just only exexecuted a third of it. And
That's exactly right. And so you really, you get out what you put in. So that's another strategy. Another fun thing is like an unbiased outside perspective. That's worth its weight in gold from a coaching perspective. So here's an example. Nick, there's this church and they were growing. And of course, if you've been in ministry for any length of time, they were experiencing service 1 at 8 a.m. Everything stopped at 9:30 and they had Sunday school for everyone, adults and kids and everybody. And then they had the third service. So I call that the sandwich model. Make sense?
Yep. I grew up in it. Yeah.
Okay. So now watch this. They had grown enough that they were getting ready to add the 9:30 service. And so they were going to have first, second, and third service. And she goes, what do you think we're going to experience? And I said, I can tell you exactly what you're going to experience. And so we walked through that. Now, here's the interesting thing. She said, almost in passing, she goes, well, how do you think this is going to affect the new Sunday school curriculum that I want to throw into the mix? And I said, slow down, back up. Did you just say implement a brand new Sunday school curriculum? And I know because I've worked with you that you've done the current curriculum for like 6+ years and everybody is ultra dialed into that. And now you're going to throw in like the outside grenade of a complete like service change where you're now looking to have 3 identical Sunday schools, and now you have competition with service. That alone is a big enough change.
Yeah.
And so I said,
you could lose volunteers in it. So you lose volunteers from the competition, and now you're still trying to switch curriculum.
Okay, so I said, you're going to lose volunteers. You're going to see a dramatic. Here's the predictable 7 things, which we won't get into right now. But here's the 7 guarantees that you're going to have by adding that middle service. And she was like, oh. She goes, you're recording this coaching call. I said, of course, I record them all. She goes, I really need to share with our senior pastor the things that are going to happen because he is not seeing any of those. And I said, there you go. This is not my first rodeo. I can tell you what's going to happen. And then I said, Can I tell you something that you don't want to hear? Long pause. She said, yes. I said, whatever you do not change your Sunday school curriculum at the same time this other major change is happening. And she was very disappointed, but I said, can you trust me? And so that was an outside perspective. And by the way, I just continued to ask questions of her. And I said, hey, what about this? And so then all of a sudden, through the series of questions, there was this moment of self-discovery where she was like, oh, if we change our Sunday school curriculum at the same time this other big change, it's going to be double chaos. And I said, I have now led you through questions to conclude the very thing that I could have told you, but my questions caused it to be your cognitive aha moment. And that's what I'm seeking to do as a coach, is give them their own cognitive aha.
Yeah, and I tell people all the time that, like, with Ministry Boost, Kenny and I are not really coaches in the sense that you talk about there, or even sometimes there's even another level of coaching, which is a little bit closer to counseling, where it's like, I don't even have best practices I'm going to share with you. I'm just asking the right questions for you. Like, coaches that help people in various industries where they don't even have expertise in the industry. They're just good at the questions, the part you're talking about right there. And I'm not proud of it, but it's something I'll say a lot about Kenny and I. It's like, we're actually not great coaches. We're just practitioners. So we can tell you, hey, you want to do this. This is how you should do it. You could do it this way, or this way. This is our favorite. You know what I mean? And you can do whatever you want. But
and I'll say, Nick, that I would be a hybrid. Right? So I'm not a counselor who's sitting back and only asking questions and wait. No, dude, there's times where I'm like, okay, close your notebook, do this, trust me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there are times where I'm not going to say dictatorial, but I dictate to them, this is a best practice and you're going to be in huge trouble if you don't do this. That's fine. But then there's other times where I will just ask questions about their staff. I'll ask questions about their structure with the intent of exposing this glaring oversight that I want them to stumble upon. So it's kind of a hybrid for me, so to speak.
And it is better. I mean, like, that's why I'm afraid of that. We're not that great, because I do think that's better for a number of reasons. One, they get there, but two, they also start to think that way about other things. So like when their problem next month is a different problem, they'll sit there and start asking themselves the same kind of questions you asked, and now they're solving it, themselves in a different way, which is great. Yeah, well, that's powerful.
Another quick thing is, okay, so another big one, Nick, is sadly is that this sounds crazy, but it's the truth. About probably at least a third of the people that I've coached, I have helped them with one of two things. Either, like, I've helped them exit their current church in a healthy way, or I've caused them to conclude that you really need to take stock. Is this a good place for you? And so kind of both of them fit under the idea of you're going through a lot of turmoil. This may be, I've seen a lot of very toxic environments where all of a sudden I ask a couple of questions and I'm like, I know exactly what's going on here. This is a pseudo-toxic environment with maybe a couple of leaders who aren't really that thoughtful, and there's a lot of pain points. And so, I've helped a lot of people transition out of their current church in a way that is the least painful for them, and hopefully in a winsome way for their church. And so I've helped a lot of people transition out of a role through coaching.
Yeah. I have some questions about that, but I want to make an observation first. At the conference we were both at recently, our mutual friend, Vance Martin, who works at Slingshot Group and leads the Next Gen division, which Slingshot helps churches hire staff, and I work with Vance in that way. His breakout was about, should I stay or should I go for my church, right? And I laughed because every time, and his breakout was early. It was like the first day of the conference. Every time I came by his booth to just hang out and how's he doing, he had somebody on the couch counseling. And I'm pretty sure most of them went to that breakout and were probably in the same boat you were in. So it is, unfortunately, like you said, a third. I think it is far more common than you think. Part of it is, I think, just it's really sad and unfortunate, but a lot of churches are not healthy, unified, great places to work. And that's true of all organizations. Churches are just no exception. And so I'm wondering, as you come across this a lot, one, do you know early? Like in the coaching, is it pretty obvious? Or does it take time? And then two, do you get to a point where you're willing to tell them, I think you should leave?
Yeah.
Like, you get there fast?
Let's start with that second one. There have been a couple of cases, two that I think of right now, but I have helped a lot of people with this particular deal, where one of them, darn it, I'm just so sad. It grieves me even right now all over again that I needed to finally, after 7 months of coaching, I saw the writing on the wall. I knew what was happening. I knew that the church, sadly, they were treating one another as the Gentiles treat one another. They were not treating one another as how the kingdom ought to have people be treated. Let me give you an example. So what they were doing is they were taking a corporate piece from the playbook, and they were saying, we are going to slowly and methodically make this person's job terrible in the hopes that this person concludes, this is no longer worth it for me, and then they choose to quit, and then the church stands up in front of the congregation and says, we are just so grateful that God is calling Connie to do something different. Let's just celebrate God's call for her. And I want to slap the church and say, that is righteous lying. Because you created the conditions that were so terrible that this person concluded, I have no other choice. And so you forced their hand to quit, but now you're trying to position this erroneously as God calling them. If God called them, it's because you set up the terrible conditions. So that happens a lot. And so I was watching this dear woman, and I knew that this was what was happening. I would ask questions, but she was very resistant because she'd been at this, she helped this church get started. She'd been there 11 years. She was an integral part. They were moving now in a different direction, and they didn't want her to be a part of the staff anymore. The most honorable thing, just tell her that this season is done. Yeah. Now, the church, the reason why they don't often do that, Nick, is because if you've been there 11 years, there's some people who absolutely love you. You baptized their kid.
Oh, yeah.
You helped them
Yeah,
through a marriage difficulty.
Yeah.
That you are
You could
there.
have the majority support of the church, actually. You know, you think 70% of the people could be mad if you're gone. Yeah.
And so then the church is in this quandary where they're like, okay, because the church is unique, right? If it's a bank, dude, you're gone. We'll fill you in, somebody else. But this is there's a family dynamic here, right? And so people's hearts and lives have been affected. And so, you know, at one point then I just said, hey, are you sitting down? You know? And I said, I want to let you know, here's what the church is doing. They are creating the conditions that they're hoping that you quit. Do you realize this? And she had some tears. And it was after 7 months, so I had grown a deep relationship with this person. We ended up getting on the call with her. Her husband joined the call. And even though this was far above and beyond, this is what was needed. And so we had probably half a dozen, if not more, rapid fire calls with her and her husband to know how to navigate this really complex thing. And so it didn't just involve her, it involved how are we going to manage this as a family?
Yeah, you know what's hard? You and I talked about a little bit about this before when I asked you about this, because I was asking you where, I know it's rough, like estimates off the top of your head, what did those people end up doing? Like how many of them worked for another church, how many of them didn't? And it was a good number that didn't. And it makes sense because a lot of times, I always say most kids pastors are homegrown, like a lot of us did not, like I'm homegrown. Like I didn't move for my job. Yeah, you were. It's very, I don't know what the number is, but probably 80% or more are homegrown, meaning they didn't move for this job. They didn't go to school to become a kids pastor and then go get one. And you just kind of did at your church. Usually a lot of times it's like your church needed someone and you were there and you're local. So then if it's not working out, that's hard because it could be your church. You've been in it for a long time. You're also not looking to move to get the other, to get another job. And then how many other churches in town, especially like where I live? I mean, it's different. Maybe if you live in like Nashville or something or Dallas, you could have a lot of church options. You live where I live. It's like, not that many. And then you're starting to drive.
Not to mention.
That would fit your style. There's tons of churches, but if you want to go work at a church that was similar in theology and style and all of those things, method, strategy, there's not a ton here, so your options are limited, which is really sad because sometimes it's like, man, that was I was hoping it was going to work out with this church, and now it's not, and I don't want to move either. So.
Okay, so here's some of those really random dynamics. As our good friend Vance Martin with the Slingshot Group would say, children's pastors are drafted, and student pastors are called. Right? Student pastors feel this calling. They go to school for it. They're in this lane for this end, and then they get the job, and that's the whole full cycle for them. Kids pastors, all of a sudden, you're the most dynamic, and you're the one that canceled the least amount of times, and they're like, holy smokes, man, give it to Josh Denhart. You know what I mean?
Yep. It's totally true, and that's what's hard too because. I know we're wrapping up here, and I don't know what to do with this thought, but I definitely, because I grew up in a church that overplayed the called thing, I was called to this church, is called mostly the staff. And I'm not saying it wasn't true sometimes. I just feel like sometimes it was like, you weren't called. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to that church, because I also don't believe that, I'm going to just make people mad. I don't necessarily believe that God calls every one of us to every little church that we go to.
That's right.
I actually believe that God's church is universal, and whether you worked for that church or this other church, God's can use that in powerful ways. And it wasn't like that was the right choice, that church was the wrong choice. Now, in hindsight, you might think that once you've been there and whatever. But I grew up in a culture that overplayed the called card, and so I lean a little bit more towards. Man, you have your one life here on earth, and one of the most important things you're going to do with it is how you're going to do ministry.
That's right.
Make it match. Go to a church, be a part of a church on staff that you would attend if you didn't work there, because you will get the most out of it. The church will get the most out of it. And again, there's always be things we don't agree with. Yes, there will never be the church that's 100% what you want it to be. Even if you're the pastor, that's the funny secret. It's like, even if you're the pastor, it's not 100%, but is it 70% or something, like something that you would attend? Make it that.
Here's the other hard part as we close is church is the most unique organization on the planet, to where if you're a banker and you quit, your kids still go to the same school. They still have the same friend group. You still have the same adult friend group. You still go to the same church. But when you're on staff at a church and you quit, you're probably not going to continue to go to that church.
Yeah.
So now
it's
your
tough.
kids have to go to a different church. Now your kids may have a different friend group. Now, I don't care whether these friends that you have at your church are super, super good friends and you're super deep. If you don't go to church there, it's only a matter of time before that friend group is going to transition to the new friend group at the new church. So it's very complex. And so it is hard. And so I have helped people to graciously exit a church. And it's sad. But when you see somebody as a coach who is literally going through what I call like mental trauma, really, they need to do something different. Very complex, but boy, this has been a fun conversation.
It has, and I would even say too. Sometimes, I mean, I realized this with my home church, which is a great church, still going today and doing their thing. It was never going to become enough of a match for me, which is fine. That's not even like it's not toxic or bad. Right. It just was like, if I'm going to match strategically, theologically, all these things, certain churches aren't going to be a match. And that's okay. Like, that's fine. It's not like one's good, one's bad. So.
But the difficulty, of course, is since they were drafted and they've gone to this church for 12 years before, and now they've been on staff for 6, that is a really hard thing. And nobody told them, nobody showed them the fine print that after you've worked here for 6 years, it's going to be really difficult now that you know what you know to be able to continue to work at, or to continue to attend this church if you're no longer working there. It gets complex real fast.
It does. Well, Josh, man, I feel like we're just getting started, but that was like an hour, almost an hour right there. But it's always fun talking. These are the kind of conversations we have behind the scenes, and I like. Thanks for taking time to kind of pull out, like, give us a peek. I feel like we got like a peek into some Josh Denhart coaching sessions, which I knew would relate to like most of us in ministry, even regardless of role, which is really helpful. If people want to connect with you, leadministry.com, right? Is one way to do that.
Leadministry.com would be a great place to start for sure.
Great. Well, Josh, thanks for coming back and talking again. I always look forward to it.
You know, what I want to do is just every conversation that we have, we need to record because they're actually kind of fun and good, you know?
They are fun. That's true. I don't know if people listen the whole time, but I enjoy them. So they probably would. Well, you know what happened is they would contribute, and then we'd even more of a full conversation and be like, yes, you know, which does happen. Sometimes that's what happens when we're together with other friends like Vance or whoever. And you just, you know, we just learn from each other and support each other, which I love.
That's right. And that's what we want for people. That's what we want. We want your audience to be like, hey, wow, that's good. So, man, you're a good guy. Always love talking to you.
And contribute to it. Same here. Keep doing what you're doing to serve the church. I love it. Thanks, Josh.
Hey, you bet. Thank you.